Hello and welcome to Heartlight Vedic Astrology. Today I was going to talk about symbolism of the sun or Surya in Vedic Astrology, Jyotish. Just a note first, the information presented here is for educational purposes only and should not be considered medical, financial, professional, or life advice of any kind. If you are in need, please contact an appropriate professional for support. So the sun, another name for it in Sanskrit is Surya. Let's go through the strength positions first. So the sun is strongest in one of its strongest positions when it's in its own sign. Which in Jyotish we would call Swa. So if it's in its own sign, we call it Swa position. And the sun owns or is lord of the sign Leo. In Sanskrit, this is Simha. Yeah, so whenever you see Leo, the sun owns it or governs over it, and it's the only sign that it does govern. Most planets actually govern two, but the sun has one. The sun is considered in its exalted position or Ucha position when it's in Aries or Misha. So again, this is another position. When you see the sun in Aries, it is in a very strong position. The other thing is that when you see the sun, so if you're looking at a birth chart, when you see the sun in the 10th house, this is called directional strength or digbala, and the 10th house or 10th bhava represents the south or high noon. Like if you were looking at it birth chart, almost like a clock, or at least a North Indian chart as if it were a clock. The 10th house, which is the far right, is basically the south or high noon. So again, when it's high noon, the sun is at its strongest. So that's why in the 10th house it also has some strength. So some of the positions in which the sun is weak. So the sun is considered weak, debilitated, or Nicha when it's in Libra or Tula. I'm going to go back and forth between the English and the Sanskrit because that's how I learned it. And you never know which direction somebody's coming from in terms of their training or understanding, so I'll be using both. So again, the sun is debilitated or Nicha when it's in Libra or Tula. The sun is also debilitated when there's a solar eclipse because the sun is basically getting blocked out by the moon. And the sun, like all planets in Jyotish or Vedic astrology, is in a weak position when it's Sandhi. So Sandhi means that a planet is in the first or last degree of any sign, because that means that it just is about to cross over into another sign or just crossed over into another sign, so it's a bit destabilized. So especially with the sun, when it's in a strong position, that's when the strong acts in its best ways, potentially. Again, it also depends on other things, but we're just talking about symbolism of the sun today, so at least you can get kind of a handle or functional understanding of what the sun represents when you see it as a symbol in a chart. And you may not be an astrologer, you may not be looking at birth charts, but if you're interested in Vedic astrology, or at least the Vedic astrology point of view, whenever you see the things that I'm going to mention that are related to the sun, so in your waking life, in your dreams, maybe you're a tarot card reader and you see some of these symbols on the cards that you read, you might, if your intuition, dings you in that direction, it might be something related to the sun. So the sun has kind of its own. This is sort of the sun's language. So maybe you're walking down the street and you see somebody with the sun on a t-shirt, and there might be something related to the sun that you should be thinking about or consider. So the sun and its relationships. So when the sun is in signs of Mars, Moon, or Jupiter, these planets are considered friends of the sun. So Mars rules Aries and Scorpio, the Moon rules Cancer, and Jupiter rules Sagittarius and Pisces. So when the sun is in these signs, it's in a friend's house, and you can imagine when you're in your own friend's house, you're pretty comfortable and you can function pretty well. Okay, so the sun is considered in a neutral relationship with Mercury. Mercury rules Gemini and Virgo. And so the sun is kind of in neutral position. It's sort of, not a friend, not an enemy. There's not much influence that Mercury signs has in one direction or another on the sun. The sun is considered enemies with Saturn and Venus. Saturn rules Capricorn and Aquarius, and Venus rules Taurus and Libra. So the sun, you can just imagine yourself if you were in the house of an enemy, you probably wouldn't be that comfortable. You probably wouldn't be, helping yourself to food from the kitchen. You probably would, be a little bit stressed out. And so the sun also doesn't function as well when it's in the signs of ruled by Saturn or Venus. So general qualities of the sun just very generally rules or represents the soul. So when you see the sun in a particular house, that's usually pretty important. That indicates like where a lot of energy is, where a lot of drive is, and where potentially the life purpose is for somebody. The sun obviously is also a very fiery planet, so if you're into Ayurveda or traditional Indian medicine, it's considered a Pitta planet, so there's a lot of fiery indications for the sun. It is also considered a sattvic planet or spiritual planet. And, again, the general qualities of the sun is that it's intense, it's fixed, it's steady, right? The sun, it helps, life to grow on this planet, but with too much sun, it can dry things out, crack things, burn things, turn things into a desert. So there is this intensity and fixedness about the sun. It's also considered a masculine energy. So when it's in, like the fifth house or something, maybe it's the Lord of the fifth house, that might be an indication, because the fifth house represents children. It could be an indication that male children will be born, potentially. Anyway, again, it depends on the whole birth chart, but when you see the sun as a gender, it represents masculine energy. And it's also considered a natural malefic. As much as we revere the sun, and many of us are sun worshippers, and we appreciate the sun grows trees and flowers and food for us, again, when it's not, when it just beams intensely without sort of cooling effects, balancing effects of the moon, it would dry everything up, right? So just like global warming, unfortunately, going on. So too much heat coming from the earth, combined with all the heat of the sun, and unfortunately we're sort of turning into a convection oven here. So there you go. So as a personification, the sun represents the king. It can represent father, authority figures in general, the government. It has a leader, quality to it. Leaders in general have sort of a sun quality to them. In general, it also has a warrior type quality. Again, from Jyotish, Vedic Astrology, it's considered part of the Kshatriya class or the warrior class. It can be considered cruel. Again, too much heat, too much sun can dry things out and actually not only bring life to things, but end the life of things as well. Its method of persuasion is through punishment. So again, intensity and cruelty. People who have sun potentially or are Leo rising or sun in the first house, their physical nature they may be of average height. It can also represent clothing, so especially thick or coarse clothes is a sign, is an indication that sun is influencing the clothes that somebody wears. And the sun, again, because this is like, the king and father, authority, government, leaders, warriors, people who have a strong sun placement can be highly placed or powerful themselves, like maybe they're a CEO of a company, for example. And if sun is strongly positioned or related to the 7th house of partners and relationships, it might be that your partner is of high class or very powerful. So psychology relates to the sun. So the positive qualities related to the sun are nobility, individuality, generosity, grandeur, like the generous king type, dignity, power, authority, leadership, creativity, right? Because the sun also helps with creating things on this planet, like all the plant life that feeds the animal life and us. Pride, a positive sense of pride, adventurousness, ambitiousness, and courageousness. So, because again, it's the fiery adventurousness and ambition and courage. These are all kind of fiery qualities. When it's in its negative state, though, the sun can represent things like too much ego, self-centeredness, pompousness, ostentation, and somebody who's a despot. So somebody who's really into themselves and their own power, and they're not ruling for the greater good. So professions that are indicated by the sun or Surya. So if the sun is related to the 10th house of career, or it could be the 7th house of independent business, or if the 7th house or 10th house are ruled by Leo, which is ruled by the sun, then these sorts of things might be related to the career of somebody. So things like fruit trees, grains, gold and metals, textiles and wool, agriculture, medicines and physicians can be indicated by the sun, service as or under a ruler or prominent person. So whether you're president or vice president, you might have a strong sun placement. Again, the government, leadership, managers, administrators, politicians, people who are famous or literally royal, like literally the King of England, that type of person may have a strong sun placement. Anything involving fire or heat, because the sun is fiery by nature, and things that any sort of profession that supports like vitality, like maybe a life coach, or maybe one of these positive thinking, motivational speaker type people. They may have a strong sun in their chart. Spirituality is also indicated here, right? Because again, the sun represents the soul and life purpose. Mantras, so chanting mantras can be a part of this. So maybe you'd be a yoga teacher or a astrology teacher, for example. And there can also be some relatively negative things that can be associated with the sun if it's maybe in a weak position and it's not functioning well. And these could indicate that the profession involves fraud or gambling or lying. So again, depending on the condition and position of the sun, these are, again, all professions that could be related to the sun if the sun is related to the career houses. So different maladies, diseases, and difficulties can occur because of the sun. So the sun represents general health and vitality. So if the sun is in good condition and well placed, that can indicate generally good health and vitality. If it's in a weak position, then there might be issues generally. You might be somebody who always gets sick, for example. And also in terms of organs and parts of the body, so the head and brain are indicated by the sun. Eyes are also indicated by the sun. Bones and dental, teeth and spine. Again, these are all, because bony system of the body is sort of the central axis from which everything, right, sits and develops its silhouette. So just like the sun is central to our universe. Neuralgia can also be a problem, again, because it involves the nervous system and inflammation. Again, fiery planet here. The sun also represents the heart and circulation, so cardiovascular disease can be indicated by the sun. Inflammation, fever, again, because of its fiery nature. The right side of the body, and people tend to get things on the right side of the body, this can be indicated by the sun. Because the right side of the body in Ayurveda or traditional Indian medicine is considered sort of the masculine energy of all of us. Also, hereditary problems can be indicated by the sun, and the asti dhatu, or the bone tissue in Ayurveda, generally can be affected or is represented by the sun. So those are more physical conditions, but more internal, mental, emotional conditions could be difficulty with the father, with the government or authorities in general, if the sun is in not great shape or not well positioned. So the sun can also represent places, and places that the sun or Surya represents are temples, open areas, deserts, right? Too much sun. Palaces, magnificent buildings. So, like the Taj Mahal or something like that. I mean, just buildings that are impressive and grand, on the greater side, sort of grandeur aspect or energy of the sun. Also government buildings, because it's linked to government, towers and great halls. So anything that's sort of really impressive by nature, things you wouldn't forget, these would be indicated by the sun. The sun also represents certain flowers, foods, and trees, so things like red lotus or red flowers in general, wheat, large or very strong trees, mountainous trees, rare, expensive wood, pine, timber, cedar, orange tree. So trees are big here, you can see. Almond trees. Also certain herbs like chamomile, lavender, rosemary, saffron. These are indicated by the sun. Medicinal herbs generally are indicated by the sun, right, because of its link to medicines and physicians. Large, showy yellow flowers, again, looking like the sun, kind of like a sunflower. Also, edible herbs like pepper, nutmeg, cardamom, ajwain, and generally aromatic herbs are indicated by the sun. And fine wine, rare liquors, because of their fiery nature perhaps, and because of their, again, sort of luxurious nature. Things that are served at fine occasions. And the bitter flavor in general, anything with a bitter flavor can have some indication of the sun. So time and distance, the sun can represent things that mature, in about the span of 22 years, or our personal maturation at about 22 years. As a person, like when you think of the sun and the sun's energy, it would basically be like a 50-year-old, midlife working person. Not too young, not too old, kind of established, more mature in life. Things that are indicated by the sun, so things indicated by the sun may actually last 23 to 41 years. So a good portion of life, a good quarter to half of life. So again, that's part of its constancy. And the season, there are 6 seasons in the Indian system, and Grishma is considered the sun season. So that's like about the 20th of May to the 19th of July. So late spring, early summer, this is a sun period. And so length in terms of distance, the sun represents about 8 yojanas, which translates to about 4 to 8 miles. So, small to medium distances. So, for example, if you were looking at travel, the sun doesn't necessarily represent really long distance travel. It's more short trips. And so there are colors and gemstones associated with the sun. So kind of like this picture here, dark, deep red is indicated by the sun. And so some people like to use colors and gemstones to help either augment energy or balance energy. So in terms of color, dark, deep red as opposed to like bright blood red. Bright blood red is more of a Mars color. Gold and copper because they're shiny, you know, and you know, yellowish, reddish color, kind of like a sunset. Those are indicated by the sun, and ruby and garnet. Just a word of caution, though. I was taught that using gemstones can be a bit tricky. So you want to make sure that if you are looking to use gemstones to balance planetary energies, that you work with somebody who really knows the details of what stone to get, how big the stone is, how to make the proper setting, which finger to place the stone on, or body part to place them on. So there's a whole thing around that, and I don't actually have that information. So if that's of interest, but again, I was taught and sort of advised not to really go in the direction of using gemstones because you might actually augment some of the negative aspects of planets. So anyway, a word of caution there. So there you have it, the first look at the sun and its symbolism and what it might be representing in a birth chart if you're doing Vedic astrology or interested in Vedic astrology. And again, this sort of symbolism, it can be helpful with interpreting dreams or, you know, again, tarot cards or what we've considered omens in life. So it might give you insights about your life or life path in various ways. So I hope you found this helpful, and I very much appreciate your time, and I will see you in the next talk.